Hey, tonight we're bending the rules of reality just a little and stepping into the strangest time travel theories hidden in history. Not sci fi, not movies, real accounts, artifacts, and ancient texts that make you wonder, did someone slip through time? From ancient carvings of modern technology to unexplained disappearances and people who claim to be from the future, history has more time warp weirdness than you'd expect. If you're into this kind of late night journey through the strange and unsettling, drop a like or hit subscribe. It really helps keep this going. And hey, I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's build this little global campfire together. Now dim the lights, get cozy, and let's drift across the centuries because tonight we're unraveling time travel theories buried deep in the past and deciding for ourselves what's real and what's just too strange to explain. Imagine a machine, not one that takes you through time physically like some sci-fi phone booth or DeLorean, but one that lets you see time. Not just a fuzzy echo or vague impression either, but clear images, sound, even emotion. A device that could tune into the past like a television channel, allowing you to witness history in real time. Wars, miracles, betrayals, martyrs, gods. That's the chronovisor. Supposedly built in secret by a monk who liked to tinker and a physicist who probably knew too much, it's said to be one of the Vatican's most closely guarded relics. And no, you can't borrow it. The story goes like this. In the 1950s or 60s, the timeline is fuzzy. Appropriately, a Benedictine monk named Father Pellegrino Ernetti, who was also an exorcist and classical music scholar, announced to a very small circle that he and a team of scientists had invented something extraordinary. With the help of Italian physicist Enrico Fermi. Yes, that Enrico Fermi, the guy with a literal nuclear legacy, and German rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, you may remember him from that whole NASA Saturn V moon landing deal. Ernetti claimed to have built a machine that could view scenes from the past by capturing residual energy, or chrononic vibrations, the leftover radiation of historical events still echoing in the ether. They called it the chronovisor, a viewer of time. It was said to look something like a chunky wooden cabinet, crossed with a 1950s television with knobs, levers, and a screen that could be tuned to any point in history. The user could theoretically dial up any location, any date, and observe what happened as if the past were being rerun on cosmic cable. No interaction, no interference, just observation. Like a very high-stakes Netflix subscription with serious theological implications. According to Ernetti, the team tested the machine on scenes from ancient Rome specifically, Cicero giving a speech in the Roman Senate. They watched, listened, and apparently judged his Latin to be perfect. They also claimed to have observed the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Napoleon giving orders in battle, and perhaps most famously, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ himself. They even reportedly took a picture, a blurry image of a bearded man in agony on a wooden cross, which Ernetti later released publicly in the 1970s. Critics immediately noted that the image looked suspiciously similar to a wooden carving displayed in an Italian church. But then again, how many unique ways are there to depict a crucifixion? Here's where the story does that strange Vatican turn part Dan Brown, part locked door thriller. Ernetti suddenly recanted, sort of. Before his death in 1994, he signed a statement claiming the chronovisor never existed, that the image of Christ had been faked, and that it had all been a fabrication. But others close to him, friends, family, and even fellow clergymen hinted that this recantation might have been forced, that the Vatican pressured him into silence. After all, if such a machine did exist, it would pose enormous risks. Think about it. Access to objective history, real-time footage of saints and sinners alike. It would be the end of secrets, of faith-based ambiguity, of revisionist history. If the Vatican does have such a device, they've buried it deep, allegedly locked away in the secret archives, a place that exists, by the way, and houses some 50 miles of shelving with documents spanning centuries. Only a handful of scholars are allowed access, and even then, only by request. No chronovisor on the catalog, of course. Skeptics say the whole thing is a hoax, a tall tale dreamed up by a lonely monk with a love of mystery and classical drama. They point out that the physics don't add up, that even with quantum theory, relativity, and particle magic, there's no known mechanism for tuning in to the echoes of time. Memories don't exist in space like DVR recordings. Events don't leave permanent, retrievable footprints. But that's assuming everything we know about time is actually right. There's a strangely enduring belief, though, among some fringe physicists and theological theorists, that the past does leave ripples, that every action creates a vibration, that sound, light, motion, thought, all of it bends space just a little. If someone figured out how to read those bends, maybe with exotic particles or hypersensitive sensors, who's to say what might appear on the screen? Then there's the question of why someone like Ernetti would make this up. He wasn't a crank. He was respected, academic, published. He wrote on ancient music theory, participated in exorcisms, and wasn't known for outlandish claims until this one. And once he made it, he didn't push it for profit or attention. He gave sparse interviews, never wrote a book, released one photo, one time. The whole thing is oddly quiet, which makes it more unsettling somehow. There's another twist. An anonymous letter surfaced after Ernetti's death, supposedly from someone who knew him. It said the device had worked, but the team dismantled it voluntarily after realizing the implications. That people began to obsess over the past, that leaders wanted to use it for blackmail, that the temptation to manipulate, to weaponize memory, became too great. According to the letter, the machine was disassembled and hidden, its blueprints destroyed. Of course, conspiracy theorists didn't stop there. Some say the Vatican still uses the chronovisor for internal verification of miracles. Others claim it's used to monitor signs of the Antichrist, or that it revealed the real history of Jesus, which differs just enough from the Bible to be theologically inconvenient. A few even say parts of the device were smuggled out, and attempts to recreate it have continued in secret labs across Europe. So what do we make of all this? Maybe it was all a well-crafted myth, a parable for the dangers of omniscience. Maybe Ernetti was delusional, or lonely, or simply trying to reconcile science with faith in a world increasingly skeptical of both. Or maybe he really did sit in front of a screen in a Vatican basement and watch history breathe. No matter how you slice it, the chronovisor sits in that perfect crack between what we want to believe and what we hope never existed. A time machine that doesn't let you change anything, just watch, helplessly. Like history itself is a haunting. And if the Vatican does have it, you'll never know. It started with whispers, green mist, missing sailors, a warship that blinked out of existence like a magic trick no one signed off on. The year was 1943. America was elbow deep in World War II. Science was stretching its legs in terrifying new ways, splitting atoms, bouncing radar, and trying to outwit death with mathematics and electricity. Amid all that chaos, a story emerged from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard that still refuses to die. The USS Eldridge, a Navy destroyer escort, supposedly vanished. Not metaphorically, not strategically, literally, as in, there one moment, gone the next. According to the lore, The Navy was conducting secret experiments, some say based on Einstein's unified field theory, others say born from Nikola Tesla's theoretical leftovers to render ships invisible to radar. But somewhere along the line, the experiment allegedly went way beyond radar. Witnesses described arcs of electricity, humming fields, a strange green fog, and then nothing. The ship was gone. Not just off the charts, physically missing. Minutes or hours later, depending on which version you hear, the USS Eldridge reappeared not in Philadelphia, but in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away. Some say it was visible there only briefly, like a ghost ship peeking through reality's curtain before blinking back to Philly. Now, here's where the story turns from science fiction to full-body horror. When the ship reappeared, something was wrong. Sailors had gone mad, walking through walls, screaming incoherently. A few were reportedly fused to the metal of the ship, their bodies partially embedded in bulkheads, like something out of a David Cronenberg nightmare. Others had vanished entirely, or reappeared days later in strange states of disorientation. One sailor allegedly materialized inside out. The Navy, for its part, said this never happened. There was no such experiment. The USS Eldridge, they claimed, was never in Philadelphia on the alleged date of the incident. Ship logs, they said, put it somewhere else entirely. End of story. Move along. Except the story didn't die. It grew. Much of the fuel came from a man named Carl M. Allen, who also went by Carlos Allende. He claimed to have witnessed the experiment from aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth, a nearby merchant ship. In a series of wild handwritten letters sent to UFO researcher Morris Jessup in the 1950s, Allen described the vanishing ship, the distortion in space-time, the disoriented sailors. He said the Navy had unlocked something it couldn't control, a new dimension of warfare, or possibly a breach in the fabric of reality. Jessup, for his part, found the letters unsettling enough to take seriously. He'd already written about UFO propulsion and advanced physics, so Allende's letters didn't seem entirely off-brand. But then Jessup died, under suspicious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide, though many who followed the story find the timing just a little too tidy. Then there was the so-called Vero edition, an annotated copy of Jessup's book sent to the U.S. Office of Naval Research, marked up with eerie notes in 3 different styles of handwriting, supposedly a conversation between extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings discussing Earth science, time travel, and the Philadelphia experiment. Varo Manufacturing, a military contractor, printed a limited number of copies, and like any good conspiracy artifact, the mystery only deepened. So what really happened? Skeptics, including actual naval historians, point to a mundane explanation. There was a series of tests involving degaussing, a process used to demagnetize ships and make them less susceptible to magnetic mines. These tests used coils and electromagnetic equipment, and when seen from a distance, could have looked bizarre. Add to that wartime secrecy, odd ship movements, and a sailor or two who had too much time and imagination, and suddenly you've got yourself a legend. Then there's the teleportation theory that the USS Eldridge wasn't made invisible to radar, but actually jumped through space-time. If Einstein's unified field theory held up, which, to be clear, has never been fully proven or completed, then maybe the Navy had unlocked a wrinkle in space-time. But that's a big maybe, like monumentally big. The time travel camp leans into this wrinkle. They say the ship didn't just jump location, it jumped timeline. Some versions claim sailors woke up in different years. Some even say they were later found institutionalized under fake names, rambling about dimensions and vibrations. Others think the green fog was a side effect of tearing open a hole in time, a byproduct of exposure to interdimensional forces that the Navy neither anticipated nor understood. It doesn't help that pop culture has run wild with it. The 1984 film The Philadelphia Experiment turned the story into a full-blown sci-fi epic, complete with time travel, secret bases, and government cover-ups. Every time someone brings it up on Reddit or YouTube, it gets a little weirder. Was Tesla involved? Was this a test for something even darker? Did it lead to the Montauk Project, Stranger Things, MK Ultra? Choose your rabbit hole. The USS Eldridge itself was sold to Greece in the 1950s, where it served under a new name until the 1990s. No one's found sailors melted into the bulkheads, but that hasn't stopped people from believing. Because here's the thing. The Philadelphia Experiment sits in that perfect sweet spot between too absurd to be real and just weird enough to maybe be true. The idea that the military could have opened a door it couldn't close that technology. In wartime desperation, outpaced morality or understanding is deeply compelling, especially when the people who are supposed to tell you the truth say, with a wink and a nod, "There's nothing to see here." So maybe it was a hoax. Maybe it was a degaussing test gone weird. Or maybe, just maybe, one day in 1943, a U.S. Navy ship vanished in a green shimmer of light, stepped outside of time for a moment, and came back a little too haunted. It started like any pleasant summer outing. Two English academics, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, decided to visit Versailles while living in Paris in 1901. They were intelligent, respectable women. Moberly was the principal of St. Hugh's College, Oxford, and Jourdain was an author and educator. Neither were prone to flights of fancy or ghost stories. But what happened during their walk through the gardens of Versailles would end up launching one of the strangest, most persistent time-slip tales in history. It wasn't their first visit to Versailles, but on this particular day in August, they set out to find the Petit Trianon, a small chateau once frequented by Marie Antoinette. They got lost. Or rather, they thought they were lost. That's when things started to get off. The atmosphere shifted. The sunlight, they later said, seemed unnatural, as if dull, hazy, almost like walking into a painting. The gardens, normally bustling, felt eerily empty. No breeze, no rustling leaves, just stillness. As they wandered, they passed several figures. One man in particular struck them as strange, dressed in a cloak and wearing a large hat with a shady, unsettling face. Moberly described a feeling of dread, like walking through a dream she couldn't wake up from. Nearby, a woman sat sketching. Her clothing wasn't early 20th century. It was 18th century styled pale green dress, wide-brimmed hat. Her expression too was strange, detached, flat, like someone waiting for a script to continue. Eventually, the spell broke. They found their way to the main buildings, surrounded by modern tourists and sounds and sunlight that finally felt real again. They said nothing to each other about the experience until days later, and even then, cautiously, like two people trying not to say the word ghost too loudly in a dark room. Later, they compared notes and were startled by how many details they remembered identically. The odd figures, the strange quiet, the heavy air, the costumes. They were both convinced they hadn't just wandered into a historical reenactment. No one else mentioned seeing what they had. No period actors were reported on site. And they hadn't been dreaming they'd walked those gardens together. Years passed, but the memory didn't fade. In 1911, under pseudonyms, they published a book, an adventure. In it, they outlined their Versailles experience in painstaking detail, framing it as something more than a haunting. they believed genuinely, and to their dying days that they had walked through a rip in time, that for a few minutes they'd been transported to August 10, 1792, the day Marie Antoinette supposedly left the Petit Trianon for the last time before the revolution truly swallowed the monarchy whole. They even believed the woman sketching in the garden was the queen herself. Naturally, the critics pounced. Skeptics called it wishful thinking or repressed romanticism. Maybe the women, both unmarried and highly intellectual, had a shared delusion. Maybe they'd wandered into a costume tour without realizing it. Maybe the power of Versailles' history overwhelmed them both into projecting some kind of historical daydream. But the authors insisted that wasn't the case. The garden layout they described didn't match the modern version, it matched older records. They identified buildings and paths that no longer existed. Their descriptions of clothing, weapons, even the placement of certain structures aligned more closely with pre-revolution layouts than with the 1901 estate. Some accused them of literary fraud, but Moberly and Jourdain didn't seem like grifters. They didn't seek fame, didn't do interviews, and didn't make money from the book. In fact, their reputations suffered for it, but they held firm. Eventually, Eleanor Jourdain went back to Versailles alone. She claimed to experience a similar slip again. The same eerie atmosphere, the same strange figures. It wasn't just a one-time glitch, she said. Something was genuinely wrong, or right, with the air around the Petit Trianon. The Moberly-Jourdain incident inspired decades of theorizing, some rational, some less so. The idea of a time slip became a staple of paranormal lore. Unlike traditional hauntings, time slips suggest that moments from the past don't just echo, they replay, tangibly. Maybe time isn't linear, but more like a record, and sometimes the needle skips backward. You don't just see the past, you step into it. Versailles itself has never shaken the reputation. Tourists still report strange feelings near the Petit Trianon. Some swear they've seen figures dressed in outdated clothes. One modern theory suggests that the limestone and quartz in the estate's foundations could create a kind of resonant recording under the right atmospheric conditions, a psychic VHS tape trapped in the stone. Another posits something more quantum, that consciousness is capable of tapping into alternate timelines under moments of emotional or electromagnetic stress. Or maybe, as others suggest, Versailles is simply so charged with emotion, blood, and royal drama that it plays its own reruns whether you're tuned in or not. The story has also become a classic Rorschach test. Believers in the paranormal see it as strong evidence of time travel, or at least time anomalies. Skeptics see it as a fascinating example of suggestion, projection, and the strange tricks memory can play when two people are tightly emotionally bonded and primed for drama. But something about the Moberly-Jourdain incident refuses to fade. It's not just the content, it's the tone. These weren't ghost hunters or thrill seekers. They were prim, no-nonsense academics. And they were shaken by what they saw. Whatever happened in the gardens of Versailles that summer day, it left two women convinced that the past wasn't just a story to study. It was something you could walk into, whether you meant to or not. It should have been just another dusty black and white photo from the 1940s, a harmless image tucked away in a Canadian museum, showing a crowd gathered for the reopening of a bridge in British Columbia. Nothing fancy. A few hats, a few coats, some very serious 20th century stares. But then someone looked closer. Amid the sea of fedoras and ration-era fashion, there was one man. Sunglasses. Not just any sunglasses, sleek, wraparound ones. A hoodie, possibly fleeced. And most damning of all, what appeared to be a t-shirt with a bold, graphic logo. He wasn't even trying to blend in. The other men wore ties, He looked like he'd just come from a skate park, or a Comic-Con panel, or the future. The internet, naturally, went feral. The photo was uploaded by the Brelorn Pioneer Museum and made its way into online forums in the early 2010s. Reddit, 4chan, and conspiracy blogs all had the same thought: time traveler. Specifically, hipster time traveler. He was dubbed the time-traveling hipster, which is probably the worst name to have when trying to keep your identity hidden across timelines. Everyone became a detective. People zoomed in, enhanced, drew red circles. The sunglasses didn't match the era. The shirt had what looked like a contemporary logo. Was it Photoshop? No, the image checked out. It was real. It had been around for decades. No digital trickery. So how was this man standing in 1941 looking like he just walked out of a Brooklyn coffee shop? There were explanations, of course. Sane ones. Reasonable ones. The kind of explanations that ruin all the fun. For instance, experts pointed out that wraparound sunglasses did exist in the 1940s, they just weren't popular. The hoodie could have been a lightweight sweater with a built-in hood, not common, but not impossible. As for the t-shirt, some claim the logo on it was from a 1940s hockey team, and the graphic design was just misinterpreted shadows and stitching. But for every explanation, there was a counter theory. Why would one man in the crowd look so wildly different from everyone else? Even if the pieces of his outfit technically existed in 1941, nobody was putting them together like that. Fashion historians were baffled. Clothing experts weighed in with caution. And still, that nagging feeling lingered. What if? The photo became a perfect cultural artifact of its own, not because it proved time travel, but because it hit a nerve. We want time travel to be real. We want to believe there are people among us who've seen the future and the past and lived to tell the tale, or at least photobomb it. And this guy, hoodie, shades, and all became a modern myth without saying a word. The image even inspired parodies, memes, merch. The man was photoshopped into other historical scenes: the moon landing, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Woodstock, always slightly detached, always wearing that same nonchalant smirk, the "you wouldn't get it" energy that made people want to believe he was deliberately trolling the past. But what makes the time-traveling hipster so compelling isn't just how he looks, it's what he represents: a crack in the aesthetic of time. We're used to old photos looking old, dusty, orderly, frozen in their era. The idea that someone could break that visual language just by existing, that's unsettling. It feels like watching a VHS tape and suddenly seeing someone holding an iPhone. And let's be honest, the photo wouldn't have caused nearly as much fuss if he'd just been wearing, say, slacks and a button-up. But he stood out. He made a statement. He made people ask questions. And more importantly, he made people wonder, if time travelers were real, wouldn't they dress like this? Not in silver jumpsuits or trench coats, just enough to blend in, but always a little off, a little wrong. Like someone who knows exactly what's going on, but is trying not to interfere. Or maybe doesn't care. Some theories, the wilder ones, go further. Maybe he wasn't just a traveler, but a tourist, dropping into history's big moments for a photo op. Maybe there's a whole fleet of time tourists out there, hopping from century to century, always wearing something that almost makes sense. Or maybe this was just his version of Casual Friday. The Vatican has its chronovisor. Versailles had its time-slip tourists. Canada, apparently, got the chillest time traveler of all, one who didn't bring a camera, didn't change history, didn't leave a warning, just stood quietly at a bridge opening, waiting for someone to notice him 70 years later. In the end, The time-traveling hipster remains unsolved, not because there's no explanation, but because all the explanations feel like they're missing the point. The photo itself is like a Rorschach test for belief. If you want time travel to be real, this is Exhibit A. If you think it's all nonsense, then it's a coincidence, a fashion anomaly at a local event. But even skeptics can admit it's a weird photo, and weird photos have a way of sticking around. So whether you believe he was a man out of time or just the best-dressed Canadian in 1941, one thing's certain: he made history just by standing still. It started, like most strange things in the early 2000s, with a forum post. The username was John Titer. The topic? Time travel, not the theoretical kind. The "I'm literally doing it right now" kind. He claimed to be from the year 2036, a soldier, an American, part of a government program to retrieve an old IBM 5100 computer which, according to him, held secrets critical to fixing a future computer crisis. It was just absurd enough to sound like science fiction, but just plausible enough to make people squint at their monitors and think, wait, what if? He didn't come in with fireworks. His first posts were low-key, buried in threads about time machines and general sci-fi chatter, but what made him different, what made him stick, was the detail. John didn't just say, time travel is real. He said how it worked. General relativity, gravity distortion, a dual singularity system. He posted diagrams, technical specs, said his machine was mounted in a 1967 Chevrolet, later upgraded to a truck. The kind of thing you'd expect from someone who either one, really knew physics, or two, had a lot of free time and access to a library. And then came the predictions. John claimed his 2036 was not the future we were hoping for. He said America would descend into civil war starting in 2004, sparked by unrest over political and constitutional tensions. A global nuclear war would follow in 2015, billions dead, cities gone. He described the future not like a prophet, but like a guy who'd lived through it. The air felt real, gritty, ugly. No jetpacks, no utopia, just a fractured world of survival, rebuilding, and of course time travel missions. Naturally, people had questions. Lots of them. How did the time machine work? Why come back to 2000? Could he prove anything? John responded patiently, often cryptically. He claimed he was stopping in 2000 only as a layover to visit his 3-year-old self and collect photos lost in the future's coming chaos. He offered just enough answers to keep the crowd intrigued, and he warned repeatedly that timelines weren't fixed, that his presence might have already altered our course, that the Everett Wheeler model of quantum physics meant he could never fully prove he was from our exact future, only a future. In short, every time someone tried to corner him, he slipped sideways into uncertainty, which, for a time traveler, is a pretty convenient trick. Then there were the files, diagrams of his time machine, pictures of the dashboard. The machine looked like something out of a gritty sci-fi film wires, control panels, glowing lights. Nothing polished or Apple designed. It looked used, tangible. Some claimed the photos were doctored. Others insisted they showed real functioning equipment. To this day, no one's found where those exact images came from. If they were stock photos, why hasn't the original surfaced? People began to dig. Some thought he was a hoax artist, perhaps a collective of posters spinning a long-form role-play. Others thought he was a disgruntled physicist, slipping real warnings into fictional threads. And a few? They went full conspiracy. Maybe he really was a time traveler, and the whole thing was a test. A probe, a soft drop of future knowledge to see how the past would react. Then, in 2001, John left. Just a final post saying he was returning to 2036. No fanfare, no last riddle, just gone. His posts stopped. His account went quiet, but the mythology only grew louder. Years later, fact-checkers and internet sleuths would try to piece together who John Titor really was. A few pointed to a Florida lawyer, and his brother one had filed a patent suspiciously similar to Titor's time machine description. Others suggested performance art, or even marketing for a book or film that never launched, but none of it quite fit. Too much time had passed. The trail was cold. Titor, like any good time traveler, had left no footprint. And that's what makes his story endure. It's not that people still believe everything he said. It's that he showed up at the right moment when the internet was young and weird, when message boards were the digital campfires of curious minds. Before social media turned everything into brands and monetized chaos, John Titor stood in the middle of a forum thread and whispered, "The world ends, but don't worry, I made it through." He was wrong about a lot. There was no civil war in 2004, no nuclear disaster in 2015. But his warnings about division, corruption, the danger of trusting systems too blindly feel less like failed predictions and more like early echoes, a distorted signal from a timeline that could have been ours. Might still be, if we squint. To this day, no one has proven who John Titor really was. Maybe he was a hoax with a genius for sci-fi. Maybe a LARPer who lucked into legend. Or maybe he was from 2036 and he knew this version of us would need a little mystery, a little wonder, to keep going. A digital ghost haunting us from a thread posted decades ago. After all, if you could visit the past just once, wouldn't you want to leave behind something weird enough to be remembered forever? Some ancient stories feel like mythology. Others feel like bad translations. And then there are the ones that feel like someone time traveled, saw a fighter jet, and did their absolute best to describe it using the vocabulary of goat carts and thunder gods. Let's start with the Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. These are colossal works of literature from ancient India, packed with battles, gods, morals, and flying machines called vimanas. Now, flying machine might conjure up a little magic carpet action, but the descriptions go deeper. Some of the vimanas are said to move in all directions, vertically and horizontally. They emit noise. They have what appear to be mechanical parts. Some are even powered by mercury engines, according to certain translations, which is oddly specific for people who didn't know what a combustion engine was. The Mahabharata doesn't stop at vimanas. It also talks about celestial weapons that sound suspiciously advanced. One in particular, the Brahmastra, is described as a weapon that causes immense fire, wind, and death. The land becomes scorched, the rivers boil, the trees fall. People's hair and nails fall out, radiation poisoning, nuclear-level devastation. It's all there. These texts were written well over 2,000 years ago. Some people read those passages and think metaphor. Others, they hear mushroom clouds. Skeptics will say, relax. Ancient authors had vivid imaginations. They weren't predicting nuclear war, they were just writing epic poetry. Sure, people in 800 BCE didn't know what radioactive fallout was, but they did know fear, and they did know how to exaggerate. Maybe they were just describing something that sounded terrifying, not something they'd actually seen. But if it was all imagination, why does it echo so much with modern imagery? Jump forward a few millennia to medieval Europe. In 1538, a bishop named Pierre Dailly wrote about a strange event involving a fiery globe in the sky that descended and rose again. A bad translation of a comet? A natural phenomenon? Maybe. But then there's the issue of medieval illustrations, frescoes, tapestries, even sacred texts that show what look eerily like spacecraft. In one famous 15th century painting, there's a man gazing up at a glowing disk in the sky while cradling a telescope-shaped object. Did they know what they were drawing? Or were they just copying what someone told them? Then there's the Voynich manuscript, the weirdest bedtime story nobody can read. It's full of botanical diagrams of plants that don't exist, charts of stars, women bathing in vats connected by tubes, and what appears to be a highly questionable attempt at an intergalactic plumbing schematic. Some pages show what look like cells, others look like DNA strands. People have tried to crack the code for years, and the best we've got is, maybe aliens, or just a medieval nerd with way too much ink and no social life. But even outside the margins of forgotten manuscripts and psychedelic Sanskrit epics, you'll find references to time behaving strangely in old records. The ancient Greeks talked about chronos and kairos, linear time and divine time. The Mayans had complex calendars that looped and folded in on themselves, as if time wasn't a line but a spiral. And throughout history, from tribal shamans to Renaissance mystics, there have been consistent whispers about people disappearing and reappearing, seeing visions of cities not yet built, hearing voices from the future. In Ethiopia, the Kibra Nagast, a 14th century text chronicling the Solomonic dynasty, includes stories of flying machines and divine vessels moving across the sky. In Japan, the Utsuro Bune, tale from the early 1800s, tells of a woman arriving on the shore in a metal egg-shaped craft, speaking an unknown language, and carrying a mysterious box. Most historians call it folklore, but the way the ship is described sounds more like a capsule than a boat. Time tourist with bad directions? Then there's the Book of Ezekiel, a text that's made its way into both religious doctrine and ancient alien fan theories. Ezekiel sees a wheel within a wheel in the sky, accompanied by glowing beings and strange noises. Interpret it as a divine vision, sure. But the imagery rotating mechanisms, flashing lights, and flight has been reinterpreted by some as a primitive description of a spacecraft. Ezekiel didn't know what a UFO was, but he might have seen one, depending on how generous you are with your belief system. And here's where things get weird in a cozy kind of way. What if it's all true? What if some ancient scribes did see advanced tech? Not because aliens showed up with PowerPoint, but because the future leaked a little. Time travel doesn't need to be a DeLorean. It could be an experiment gone wrong, a person stuck in a loop, a ripple through the fabric of what we think is linear history. Maybe someone from 3036 accidentally dropped a drone into Babylon, and some poor farmer saw it buzz by and thought, yep, that's a flying demon. Maybe someone really did see a man-made device powered by liquid mercury, and they wrote about it using the only terms they had: gods, lightning, fire. Maybe a scribbled note in the margin of a crumbling manuscript is actually the first record of someone trying to describe a watch. Because if time travel is real even once, then the past isn't as sealed as we think. And maybe, just maybe, some of those old stories aren't about what people imagined, but about what they saw. In glimpses, in fragments, in a language that didn't have words for jet engine or fiber optics, but did have awe. And awe, as always, leaves a trace. In the sleepy seaside town of Montauk, New York, nestled behind the ruins of a decommissioned military base called Camp Hero, there's a story so strange it makes conspiracy theorists rub their temples with joy, and Netflix executives take notes. The Montauk Project is one of those tales where the line between fiction and paranoia is so blurry you almost forget which side of the timeline you're on. It has everything: Cold War fear, government secrecy, kids with psychic powers, and a plot that allegedly includes both aliens and time portals. It's essentially Stranger Things, but the version that doesn't stop when the credits roll. The story begins where most good conspiracy theories do, with experiments, lots of them. According to the legends, after World War II, Camp Harrow, originally set up to guard the East Coast, wasn't shut down entirely. Instead, it allegedly became the site of classified projects aiming to study psychological warfare, mind control, and eventually, time travel. Think of it as a scientific candy store for madmen with clearance. The project allegedly spun out of the Philadelphia experiment, the infamous event where a naval ship was said to have been rendered invisible and possibly teleported in the 1940s. Survivors from that supposed incident, traumatized and confused, were reportedly sent to Montauk for further research. Because, of course, if a secret experiment goes wildly wrong, the best idea is to double down. Enter Preston Nichols, one of the most prominent whistleblowers. SIF. You can call someone a whistleblower when they're also talking about psychic time tunnels. Nichols claimed he recovered repressed memories of working on the Montauk Project in the 1970s and 80s. According to him, he helped run experiments that could tap into the human mind like a Wi-Fi signal. Subjects, particularly children, were put into altered states and used to remote view, move objects with thought, and eventually somehow tear holes in space-time. One boy, Nichols claimed, was particularly powerful, a psychic prodigy named Duncan. Under intense stimulation, Duncan could allegedly manifest things from his dreams into physical reality. Yes, like a human 3D printer for nightmares. One day, Nichols said, Duncan visualized a terrifying beast monster and it appeared. It rampaged through the base before being destroyed. This, according to Nichols, was the beginning of the end. If you're thinking, this sounds exactly like the Upside Down in 11, you're not wrong. In fact, the creators of Stranger Things originally pitched their show as Montauk. It was supposed to take place in that very town and lean even harder into the lore. They changed the location, but the skeleton of the story remained. Psychic kids, shadowy government labs, and tears in reality. The Montauk narrative keeps getting weirder. There were allegedly chairsias, actual physical chairs tied into ancient alien technology, possibly salvaged from Roswell. These chairs could focus mental energy and open wormholes, time tunnels, real Stargate stuff. People were supposedly sent back and forth in time and sometimes didn't come back right. The project also supposedly experimented with wiping memory. It's said that many of the people involved don't remember their role soar, only began recalling them later through dreams, hypnosis, or spontaneous awakening. This, conveniently, makes the theory impossible to prove and even harder to fully debunk. Perfect fuel for the conspiracy engine. Even the base itself plays into the mythos. Camp Hero is real. You can visit it. The radar tower still stands, rusted and ominous, like it's waiting to call home to some other dimension. Officially, it was part of a Cold War coastal defense system. But walk around long enough, and you'll hear the whispers locals, who swear there are sealed-off tunnels beneath it, and maybe even rooms that were never meant to be found. There are reports of strange noises, electromagnetic interference, and people getting sick or dizzy near the tower. Some even claim they've encountered men in black suits or unmarked vans parked just a little too long near the gate. All of this, of course, is anecdotal and exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from a place allegedly built to tamper with reality. The Montauk Project also dips its toes into the subject of extraterrestrials. Some versions of the story claim the U.S. government struck deals with alien species in exchange for technology. The aliens allegedly helped construct some of the equipment used in the experiments, and may have even manipulated the timeline themselves. Because why just have one conspiracy when you can stitch five together into a time-warping quilt of chaos? And then there's the timeline issue. Supposedly, the Montauk experiments created branching realities, alternate versions of history, and temporal scars that can't be undone. Some believers say the modern world is a side effect of Montauk history, rerouted, technology leaking ahead of schedule, and people occasionally glitching out of place like background characters in a broken video game. So, what's true? What's made up? What's half remembered from a dream someone once had in a government-funded sensory deprivation tank? That's the thing no one knows. There's no official paper trail, no declassified documents, no reliable evidence beyond first-person accounts, sci-fi books dressed up as memoirs, and the persistent feeling that something weird did happen behind those fences. The government, of course, denies everything. Camp Hero is just a park now. The buildings are sealed for safety. There are no secret labs, no time chairs, no Duncan. But that's exactly what they'd say, isn't it? Buried beneath centuries of dust, in tombs, temples, and mud brick ruins, archaeologists sometimes stumble on artifacts that don't play by the rules. These are the OPARTs, out-of-place artifacts, and they're like history's Easter eggs. Little objects that whisper, "You sure about your timeline?" They show up where they shouldn't, when they shouldn't, doing things ancient people allegedly couldn't do, or at least weren't supposed to know how to do. And whether they're proof of lost civilizations, time travelers with sticky fingers, or just spectacular coincidences, they keep the imagination spinning far past bedtime. Let's start in Iraq, specifically in the dusty ruins near Baghdad. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig dug up what looked like a clay jar, but inside the jar, a copper cylinder, and inside that, an iron rod, which, if you're electrically inclined, starts to look suspiciously like a primitive battery. Some even call it the Baghdad Battery. Dating back to around 250 BCE, the setup could potentially generate a small electrical charge if filled with an acidic liquid, like vinegar or lemon juice. Now, no one's saying the Parthians were running phone chargers off these things, but it raises the question. Why would an ancient civilization build something that behaves like a battery if they had no use for electricity? Art? Science? Electroplating gold? We don't know. But it's weird. Deliciously weird. Now let's float over to the Mediterranean, where the sea occasionally coughs up treasure. In 1901, sponge divers near the Greek island of Antikythera found a rusted hunk of bronze pulled from a Roman-era shipwreck. For decades, it was ignored. Just some ancient gears, they figured. But then someone actually cleaned it. What emerged was the Antikythera mechanism, a complex arrangement of dials, gears, and inscriptions that turned out to be a mechanical computer. It could predict eclipses, track planetary movements, calculate Olympic Games. This thing had a differential gear, which wouldn't be reinvented for another 0 years. It's like discovering a smartphone in a Viking burial mound. Historians have tried to place it, maybe it was a one-off, a genius ahead of their time, but really, it stands alone, spinning its bronze secrets with every turn of the dial. And then there are the helicopter hieroglyphs. Deep in Egypt's temple of Seti I in Abydos, there's a panel of carvings that, under certain lighting and erosion conditions, look uncannily like modern aircraft. One looks like a helicopter, another, kind of like a tank or maybe even a spaceship. Some believe it's just an ancient example of palimpsest, where old inscriptions were carved over with new ones, and weathering created strange new forms. Others squint and say, that's definitely a Huey. It's become one of those things people bring up when they want to question the historical narrative. Maybe the Egyptians really did know more than we think. Or maybe erosion has a wicked sense of humor. Now hop over to South America. In Colombia, a set of small golden artifacts, shaped like what some say are zoomorphic creatures, have been pulled from tombs. Except they look like fighter jets. No, really. Triangle-shaped bodies, vertical tail fins, swept-back wings. Some engineers have even built scaled-up versions and claimed they're aerodynamically functional. Are they birds stylized into jewelry? Or little golden tributes to something someone once saw fly? In India, the ancient Sanskrit texts, like the Vimana Shastra, describe flying machines called vimanas. Not metaphorically. They give mechanical schematics, instructions for what materials to use, fuel types, flight paths. Some are said to have weapon systems. It reads less like myth and more like the instruction manual from a very confused intergalactic rental company. Some historians say these are just poetic metaphors. Others, they're not so sure. Let's not forget the London hammer, a tool resembling a modern-day hammer, encased in rock allegedly 400 million years old. Critics say the rock formed around the hammer over time, through natural mineralization, supporters say. How did a modern tool get into pre-dinosaur geology? Either way, it's now displayed in a creationist museum, because if there's one thing out-of-place artifacts do well, it's fuel every side of every debate. And then there's the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. It shows parts of the world not officially explored yet, including Antarctica, long before it was discovered. Some claim it even shows the continent without its ice cap. Mainstream scholars argue it's just a composite map, stitched together from earlier charts. But the detail, especially in areas supposedly unknown at the time, has kept conspiracy theorists and map geeks intrigued for decades. There's the Dendera light, a relief on a wall in an Egyptian temple that shows what looks suspiciously like a giant light bulb. The official explanation? It's a lotus flower with a serpent inside, symbolizing creation. The alternate explanation? Ancient electricians made mood lighting in their tombs. And let's not overlook the Nazca lines, massive geoglyphs etched into the desert of southern Peru. Some only make sense from the air. Straight lines, perfect shapes, enormous animals. Why would ancient people carve drawings that can't be seen unless you're flying? Markers for gods, runways for alien tourists, art for the sky? Each part chips away at our assumptions. History, we like to believe, moves in a straight line: discovery, invention, progress, repeat. But these artifacts say maybe not. Maybe it loops. Maybe it stutters. Maybe some knowledge came early and was lost, only to be rediscovered later. Or maybe ancient people were just better at tinkering than we give them credit for. In the end, out-of-place artifacts remind us that for all we know about the past, there's a mountain we still don't. Some mysteries are probably just misinterpretations or hoaxes. Others, they're stubbornly unexplained. So we keep digging, keep speculating, and keep wondering if time occasionally forgets which pocket to keep its secrets in.